afternoon, everyone, and thank you for sticking around this late in the day. My name is Jimena Mohedas. I am a pre-al here at BU Law, and I'm very grateful to be here today. As Rose said earlier, I don't think I can speak from anyone's perspective but my own, so I'll give you a little insight as to what that is. I am one of the 10 Latina women in the class of 2020 here at BU Law. I am one of 54 total minority students in the class of 2020 at BU Law, and I am not one of the 146 white students in the class of 2020 at BU Law. But I am one of the 229 future BU Law attorneys graduating this May. Woo! Now, everything I say to you today comes from that perspective. I can't change that, and I don't want to. But it wasn't until I got to law school that I realized that I was brown. I came from a very privileged background, and although I was surrounded by white people my entire life, I never felt other until the day I walked into law school. And I walked into law school, and I was told over and over, you're different, you're different, you're different. It's okay. You can succeed, but you're different. And I had to figure out what those differences would mean in how I acted around my classmates and in how I understood this material that would inevitably impact my life down the road. I came into law school blissfully ignorant of how my brownness affected how people saw me. And as said earlier today, women of color are angry, and we're often seen as incompetent. And oftentimes our anger is understood as incompetence, but it's not that. I've been told so many times in classrooms that my argument is not a legal one and therefore it is invalid. And I would like to suggest that we reject that notion. Now, we've talked a lot today about the neutral perspective. And when you say neutral, you mean white, because the people who wrote the laws are white, the people who enforce the laws are white. And so I want to talk about in criminal law, and I was very lucky to have Professor Leonard my 1L year in criminal law. I came into law school wanting to be a public defender, and I still do, and that class just enforced that desire. Now, you start crim law, and you talk about the purposes of punishment. And Professor Leonard talked about what they actually mean in real life, but I doubt that many professors do. What we don't talk about is who are we punishing, who's doing the punishing, and how can that punishing be changed? And I want to ask why. Why don't we talk about that? Why don't we talk about who gets punished and who gets to decide who gets punished and why they're making those decisions? And that was something that in law school I always felt I was lacking, and still am to this day. And when I presented those questions, I was oftentimes shot down. I was oftentimes told, that's just not what we're talking about here. And then I took Professor Leonard's criminal justice seminar. And in that seminar, we talked about all of those things and we dove deep, but I self-selected into that seminar. And I was surrounded by only 8 other students at BU Law interested in that subject, 8. So I ask you, why do you put the burden on students to self-select into those topics in order to talk about that? We did a prison visit and it was the most impactful experience I've had at BU Law. We stood in solitary confinement cells, and I don't think I will ever be the same after that. We have doctrine, and then we have reality. And doctrine tells us that statutes can't see rings. But reality tells us that police and prosecutors can, and they do, and they use that to inform every single decision that they make. In the criminal clinic where I was a defender, I walked into district court every single day, and in front of the bar, I saw a sea of white, and behind the bar, I saw a sea of brown, and then I was there, and I was like, oh. And I was like, now what do I do? And so I had to not only represent my clients, but I also had to represent myself well, and our program well, and I had to deal with that pressure of being the only woman of color on that side of the bar. My classmates didn't have to deal with that. They didn't have to think about that when they were advocating for their clients. They just had to think about not stuttering in front of the judge. So I suggest that professors do a few things. I think that professors need to acknowledge these issues. And I know basically everyone in this room probably knows these statistics, and they were mentioned today, that 1 out of every 3 black boys will end up in prison, 1 out of every 6 Latino boys will end up in prison. We probably know that. But one else generally don't know that. And that's a shame. Because you shouldn't leave a criminal law course and not know that. You shouldn't leave a criminal law course and not know that 2.3 million people are sitting in a cage somewhere in your country. That shouldn't happen. And it happens all the time. Now, in law school, we like to do cold calls and we like to put people on the spot, and we force conversation all the time. The question is, what conversations are we forcing? And how are we going about it? I suggest that professors need to make students think critically and articulate their points out loud. Because it's not until you say it out loud, until you realize that maybe you shouldn't have said that. And then your classmates have to look at you and they can say, oh, maybe you shouldn't have said that. Because if I have to sit there and constantly defend the minority opinion, they should have to defend theirs. But that's not enough, right? Because even when I think in my head you shouldn't have said that, the amount of times I've heard a professor say that to a student, 0 times. I have never heard a professor engage a student when they have a seriously problematic view on something, ever. I don't know why. Maybe it's uncomfortable. Maybe you're all uncomfortable right now. And I'm not saying that my professors haven't been good, and I'm not saying that I haven't been very fortunate, because I think I have. I've had professors of color, I've had female professors, and I've had professors who care about the same things I care about. But every time I sat in a room, and we sat in rooms talking about affirmative action, and I sat there thinking, oh, I was probably a beneficiary of that. And then I had to listen to a kid say that, oh, affirmative action shouldn't exist. Are you kidding me? That disadvantages white men. And I have to sit there and take it. Imagine how that feels to a student of color to have to listen to their future colleague say something like that and not feel emboldened to respond. I suggest that we engage in a sort of burden shifting exercise. And as mentioned earlier by a future professor here at BU Law, the first Latina faculty of associate professor of law, she mentioned that when she assigns things in class, she tells them this will be tested. And I will tell you, from a law student's perspective, it's not tested, I'm not reading it. So when you assign those law review articles that you know are important and you think are revolutionary, you tell them this is tested. This will be on your final, and this will impact your OCI hopes and dreams. Because if you don't, they won't read it. And they definitely won't care about it. So when we talk about the real purposes of punishment and how punishment works and why we punish, why don't we talk about bail reform and prison abolition and felon disenfranchisement, and is that punishment, and what kind of punishment, and how is that furthering our goals of punishment? We don't talk about any of that. That's directly related to the doctrines that we hold so dear. So I suggest that we lean into the uncomfortable, we force those conversations, and we make people say those things out loud. Now, in the last 3 years of law school, more times than I can count, I've been asked to not only speak for myself, but for every Latinx person, for every minority person, for every person with identities that I actually don't identify with. But I've always been asked to speak on their behalf. And I'm pretty tired of doing that. And I did it today, so sorry. But I decided that it was important to me that I allow students to speak for themselves, because so often they aren't given the chance to.
In a lot of my different classes at BU, I've looked around the room and realized I'm the only person of any color whatsoever.
Isolating. Uncomfortable and marginalizing. regressive, isolating, and infuriating.
Engaging, empowering, frustrating.
Tiresome, disappointing, supportive.
When I'm in a BU classroom, I feel like I'm learning.
Intimidating, but empowering.
Underrepresented.
Because of the lack of diversity in law school, students of color carry the burden of representing their communities when issues relating to their communities turn up in it.
I feel empowered.
I feel frustrated.
Eye-opening.
Anxiety-provoking.
Participating in conversations while constantly being reminded that I am an outsider.
Frustrating.
The law is taught in a very one-size-fits-all way in law school, and this doesn't account for different students' experiences with the law or understanding the law.
The classroom environment is definitely a little difficult to navigate. I always feel like I don't want to speak up because I don't want to, say anything stupid or people think I'm dumb.
Very frustrated, but also recognize the privilege that I have to be sitting and learning at these spaces.
It can be empowering to be in a top law school classroom with other students of color and more women than men, reading cases from times when the law actively prevented this level of diversity.
Work in progress.
Now, to be clear, these are all BU Law students that currently attend BU Law that identify as a person of color, and then we're asked to record a short video explaining what law school classrooms feel like to them. Now, I might be an angry brown woman, and I might be on my way out, but they're not. So, it is for them that we're sitting here today, and hopefully can make some change moving forward.